The Uber driver hadn't even pulled away from the curb when I saw it. Taped to the door of my condo, the one I'd spent 3 years paying down, the one I'd repainted every single room in the summer before I left, was a bright orange sticker. Notice of transfer of occupancy. Below it, a handwritten note in my mother's looping cursive. We did what we had to do. Please don't make this difficult. I stood on the sidewalk in my scrubs, my duffel bag at my feet, still smelling faintly of the Portland hospital I'd spent the last 7 months in. I had driven 36 hours in 2 legs to get home, splitting the drive with coffee and audiobooks, counting down the miles to Chattanooga like a kid counting down to Christmas. I had imagined walking into my own kitchen, making eggs in my own pan, sleeping in my own bed without a stranger's alarm going off at 4 a.m. through the paper-thin walls of extended stay housing. Instead, I was standing on my own sidewalk reading a handwritten note that told me, politely, not to make a scene. Behind the curtains, I could see movement. 2 shapes. One of them laughed at something. I recognized the laugh. I would have recognized it in a coma. I didn't move for a long moment. I just breathed. In the ICU, you learn to slow yourself down before you enter a room where everything is going wrong. You take one breath, you assess, you prioritize. Panic is contagious. Calm is a decision. I picked up my duffel bag, walked up the 3 front steps, and knocked on my own door. My mother answered it. She was wearing the cardigan I had left in the hall closet. She looked at me the way you look at a bill you forgot was coming, surprised, slightly guilty, then quickly rearranging into something that resembled innocence. You're early, she said. I'm on time, I said. I told you I was coming home today. I meant, she glanced over her shoulder. We weren't expecting you until evening. It's 4 p.m, Mom. She stepped aside, and I walked into my own home. My sister was on my couch. She had redecorated. The reading chair I'd had since grad school was gone. The bookshelf had been rearranged into something that looked like a staged photo shoot. All the books turned spine in so you could only see the white pages. Some kind of trend she'd seen online. There were candles I didn't own on surfaces. I'd refinished myself. She looked up from her phone with an expression that was working very hard to be casual and not quite making it. Hey, she said. Hey, I said back. I set my bag down by the door. Someone want to tell me what that sticker on my door is about? My mother sat down in the armchair, my reading chair, I realized, now positioned by the window where my floor lamp used to be, and folded her hands in her lap. She had the posture of someone who had rehearsed this. We need to talk to you, she said, and I need you to promise you'll listen before you react. I'm an ICU nurse, I said. I listen for a living. She nodded. Then she told me. My sister had gotten into trouble. Real trouble, the kind that comes with collection calls and court dates and letters from attorneys threatening to garnish wages from a job she'd already quietly left. The credit card debt had started small, the way these things always do, and then it hadn't been small anymore. $83,000. 3 different cards, 2 personal loans, 1 very poor decision involving a friend who turned out not to be a friend. My mother had found out 6 months ago when my sister showed up at her door with an eviction notice and a cardboard box. She needed help, my mother said. I couldn't just, she's my daughter. I'm also your daughter, I said. She didn't answer that. What they had done, what the 2 of them had decided together, apparently over several weeks of conversation I was not part of, was use the general power of attorney I had signed before I left for Portland. I had signed it so my mother could handle mail, deal with the HOA if something came up, pay the water bill from my emergency account if there was a leak, standard stuff, the kind of thing responsible people do before they leave for a 7-month contract across the country. They had used it to sell my condo. The buyer had paid $340,000, cash. The deal had closed 11 days ago. The money, or most of it, had gone to pay off my sister's debt. What was left was sitting in an account my mother had opened, and my name was not on it. I want you to know that I did not yell. I did not cry. I sat down on what used to be my couch, in what used to be my living room, and I looked at the 2 of them for a long moment. My sister was staring at her phone. She had the practiced stillness of someone who knows they've done something wrong but has decided that if they don't make eye contact, it won't fully exist yet. My mother was watching me with an expression I'd seen on patients' families before, the complicated look of someone who genuinely believes they had no other option and is now, only now, beginning to wonder if that was true. The buyer, I said. Is he local? My mother blinked. That wasn't the question she'd been expecting. He's an investor. He came through a real estate agent. Why? Has he taken possession yet? The papers are signed, the money transferred. He said he was going to list it for rent. My mother's voice had gotten smaller. The agent said everything was final. Where's the paperwork? I asked. The POA you used? The sale contract? My sister finally looked up. Something shifted in her face, a flicker of something that wasn't quite guilt but was adjacent to it. It's done, she said. The lawyer looked at everything. The POA covered it. Which lawyer? She named someone. A general practice attorney who did wills and small business filings and clearly had not looked closely enough. I nodded. Then I took out my phone and I sent a text message. Not to either of them. To a number I had saved under the name of the title company I had worked with 3 years ago when I bought this place. And then I reached into the inside pocket of my bag. I kept important documents in a fireproof zipper pouch that came everywhere with me, a habit I'd developed after losing everything in a basement flood in 2019, and I pulled out a folded piece of paper. But before I tell you what was on that paper and why it was about to make everything they thought they'd accomplished disappear, drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. I want to know how far this story reaches. I set the paper on my knee, still folded. I want to ask you something, I said to my mother. Before any of this goes further, did you read the power of attorney, the actual document? She looked uncertain. The lawyer said, Did you read it? It said you were authorizing me to act on your behalf. For financial and legal matters? It said I was authorizing you, I agreed, to act on behalf of Claire the individual, to handle personal accounts and routine financial matters in the event I was unavailable. I paused. It didn't say anything about the condo specifically, did it? It said financial matters. Because I own this condo, I said, in a trust. The room got very quiet. I unfolded the paper. It was a certified copy of a deed transfer, stamped, notarized, dated 8 days before I left for Portland. I had done it quietly, without telling anyone, after a conversation with an estate attorney I'd seen specifically because of some things my sister had said the previous Thanksgiving about how I was hoarding my assets while she was struggling. That conversation had planted a seed, and the seed had grown into a very specific kind of preparation. The Claire Morgan Revocable Living Trust, I said, reading the header. Established October 14th. I am the trustee. The condo is a trust asset. A general power of attorney, even a broad one, does not grant authority over assets held in a trust. That requires a trustee designation, which you do not have, or a trust amendment, which was never made. I looked up at them. The person who signed that sales contract was not the owner of this property. That makes the signature forged. And since the buyer wired $340,000 across state lines based on a fraudulent document, that's federal wire fraud. My sister stood up. That's not you. Can't just... Sit down, I said. My voice was very calm. I'd use this voice on patients who were about to pull out their own IV lines. She sat down. My mother had gone the color of old chalk. She was staring at the document in my hand with an expression I had never seen on her face before. A kind of slow, dawning horror, like watching a storm form on a clear day. The buyer, she whispered. We can just give him his money back. We still have most of it. We can. How much did you send to the debt collectors? Silence. Mom, how much? 83,000, my sister said. Her voice had dropped to almost nothing. And a few thousand in fees. We have the rest. We can give it back. So you have roughly $250-something thousand of a $340 purchase price. I folded the document and put it back in my bag. And the buyer paid cash, which means he's going to want all of it back. Today, with interest. And possibly through a federal prosecutor. My mother made a sound I had never heard her make before. Not quite a sob, and not quite a word. My phone buzzed. The title company had confirmed what I already knew. The deed on file with the county recorder listed the Claire Morgan Revocable Living Trust as the owner of record. The name on the sales contract did not match the owner of record. The sale was, legally, void. I got up and walked to the window. Outside, a silver SUV had just parked at the curb. A man got out trim, probably mid-50s. The kind of person who moves through the world like he's done cost-benefit analyses of his own footsteps. He carried a leather folder. He looked at the front of the building with the expression of someone calculating square footage. Is that him? I asked. My mother turned to look. Her hand went to her mouth. I opened the front door before he reached the steps. He looked at me with the flat, professional gaze of someone who had expected an empty unit. I'm looking for the property manager, he said. I just took ownership of this unit and I need access to. I'm the owner, I said. He stopped. Excuse me? My name is Claire Morgan. I am the sole trustee of the Claire Morgan Revocable Living Trust, which is the legal owner of this property. The person who signed your sales contract did not have the authority to sell it. I handed him the certified copy of the trust deed. I'd strongly recommend calling your attorney. Right now. Before you make any further decisions. He took the paper. He read it. He was very good at not showing emotion, but I watched his jaw tighten as he reached the notarization date. He looked up at me. Then he looked past me into the condo, where my mother and sister were visible through the open door, sitting on my couch in the exact posture of people waiting to hear their sentencing. They told me the owner was deceased, he said. The words landed like something physical. I turned and looked at my mother. She didn't meet my eyes. They told you I was deceased, I repeated. We said, the original owner. I said there was a death in the family. I didn't mean we just needed the sale to go through quickly. And we thought if there was a complication with the estate. My mother's words were dissolving into each other. You told a buyer I was dead, I said, to fraudulently transfer my property. The buyer behind me was already on his phone. I heard him say the words, my attorney, and immediately, what happened next was not fast, but it felt fast. The way things do when a situation has been building for a long time and then releases all at once. The buyer came inside, not aggressively, but with the deliberate focus of a man who understood that he had just been defrauded of $340,000 and was identifying the exit. He spoke to my mother directly, in a voice that was controlled and cold and absolutely without mercy. He wanted the money returned. All of it. Within 48 hours. He had already retained an attorney who had already begun drafting a criminal referral to the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit. My sister started crying. My mother tried to explain that she'd had a lawyer look at the documents, that she hadn't understood the trust implications, that she had genuinely believed that the POA covered everything. The buyer was not interested in what she had believed. He was interested in $340,000. I sent it, my mother said, and her voice was barely audible. Most of it. To the collectors. And to your sister's landlord? And to the attorney who handled the sale? I don't have it anymore. The buyer looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at me. I gave him the name and contact information for my estate attorney. I told him I would cooperate fully with any investigation, that I would provide all trust documentation, and that I had no objection to whatever legal action he chose to pursue. He nodded, once, and stepped outside to make more calls. My mother was crying now too. She kept reaching for my hand and I kept moving it, not in anger, just in the mechanical way of someone who needs both hands for what they're doing and doesn't have extra to give. My sister had stopped crying. She was staring at the floor with a focused, calculating expression that I recognized because I had grown up watching it. It was the expression she got when she was trying to find the angle. You could fix this, she said. Her voice was low, directed at me, not at my mother. You could call your attorney right now and tell them it was a family misunderstanding. The buyer could get his money back from the estate. You could say you didn't know about the trust, that you'd given verbal consent. You're an ICU nurse. Your word means something. One phone call, and this becomes a civil dispute instead of a federal case. I looked at her. Or, she said, and now she was holding her phone up, screen facing me. I have texts. Saved. From 2 years ago. You were going through your breakup and you said some things about a former patient. If those got sent to your hospital's compliance department, your nursing license could be under review for 6 months while they investigate. The room was very still. I thought about those texts. I remembered the conversation. I remembered the context, a glass of wine, a phone call with my sister at 11 at night, venting about a difficult shift, the way you do when you're exhausted and just need someone to hear it. Nothing I had said was a violation. Venting is human, but a complaint filed with a licensing board was still a complaint. An investigation still took time, and time was money, and she knew that. I looked at my sister for a long moment. She looked back with the expression of someone who thinks they're holding the last card in a game they've already lost. Send it, I said. She blinked. Go ahead, I said. Send everything you have. My compliance department has my full personnel file. Every incident report, every patient outcome, every supervisor review for 8 years. My documentation is spotless. The text you're talking about, I remember that conversation. I said I had a hard shift. I said a family member was being difficult. I did not share protected information. I did not violate HIPAA. If you submit that complaint, an investigator will spend 6 weeks reviewing my records and close it without action. I paused. But the text you're about to send, that one, threatening to report me to a licensing board unless I drop a federal fraud investigation, that text is extortion. And since the buyer's attorney is standing 15 feet away on my front porch, I'm going to ask you to go ahead and send it so we have a timestamp. My sister's phone dropped into her lap. I want to press charges, I said, to the officer who had arrived with the attorney my mother had called 911 herself, 10 minutes earlier, panicking, trying to report the buyer for harassment, a call that had backfired catastrophically when she'd been asked to explain the situation. Attempted extortion, falsified professional complaint as leverage. I have a witness, and I'd like a record made today. My sister said it was a joke. Intent, the officer explained, was the operative word. They didn't handcuff my sister. They gave her a citation and a court date and a very clear explanation of what would happen next. They did take a full statement from my mother, who cooperated completely, who answered every question in a voice so flat and defeated that it barely sounded like her. The buyer's attorney arrived in person 40 minutes later, and the four of them, the buyer, his attorney, the officer, and my mother sat at what used to be my dining room table and began the process of untangling $340,000 of federal wire fraud. I sat on my front steps and drank a bottle of water I found in my own refrigerator. The neighbor across the hall, a retired teacher who had lived in this building since before I bought the unit, came out and stood beside me for a moment without saying anything. Then she put her hand on my shoulder, once, and went back inside. That was enough. 6 months later, my mother accepted a plea agreement. 18 months of supervised probation, full restitution, which she is paying from the retirement savings she spent 40 years building, and 200 hours of community service. Her attorney argued that she had been manipulated by my sister and had genuinely misunderstood the legal implications of what she was doing. The judge found that credible enough to be a mitigating factor. I don't know if I agree. I don't know if it matters. My sister was sentenced to 3 years. The wire fraud carried mandatory minimums that her attorney couldn't argue around, and the extortion charge, though the judge called it unsophisticated, added 8 months. She will be out in a little under 2 years with good behavior. I will not be at the door when she is. The buyer recovered $214,000, everything my mother had not yet dispersed, and is pursuing civil judgment for the remainder. My estate attorney tells me that judgment will likely be settled over decades. That is not my problem. What is mine? The condo, which I repainted again this spring, the same soft gray I'd chosen the first time, because it was right the first time. The reading chair, which I found at an estate sale 3 blocks away, in a color that's almost identical. The bookshelf, reorganized with spines facing out, the way they belong. I changed the locks the day they left. One clean beep when the new code set. I stood in the doorway for a moment, listening to the building settle around me. I've thought a lot, in the months since, about what it takes to protect yourself from the people who are supposed to protect you. I didn't set up that trust because I knew what my mother and sister would do. I set it up because I knew who they were, and I had been paying close attention for 31 years. And I understood that the gap between good intentions and bad judgment is sometimes the only trap you need. I didn't want to be right. I would have been happy to come home to an unchanged condo and a family who had used the power of attorney exactly as it was intended and never had occasion to discover any of this. But I was also not willing to be unprepared. I'm not angry, or I'm not only angry. There's something else underneath it, something that took me a long time to name because I didn't want it to be true. I love my mother. I love my sister, even now. I love who they were on the best days of my childhood, when we were 3 people in a small house and that was enough. What they did came from something real, fear, desperation, the kind of love that curdles under pressure into something that justifies terrible decisions. I understand that. I do not excuse it. What I no longer do is carry it. The paperwork on my kitchen table is for a new contract. Seattle. Again, I liked it there. The gray skies, the coffee, the specific kind of quiet that comes from being somewhere no one knows your name. 7 months this time. I have an estate attorney on retainer. I have a property management company that will handle anything that comes up while I'm gone. I have a neighbor with a key and a standing offer to water my plants in exchange for airport rides. My mother called last week. I let it go to voicemail. She said she was sorry, and then she said it again. And then she said something about how she hoped I understood that she had only ever wanted to help. I have listened to that voicemail 4 times, trying to find the place where what she did becomes something I can hold without it cutting me. I haven't found it yet. Maybe I will. Maybe I won't. Some doors close, and you don't get to decide whether they open again from the outside. What I know is this. I walked into that condo knowing exactly what I had prepared for and exactly what I was willing to do, and I did not flinch. And afterward, I sat on my own front steps and breathed the evening air of a city I had chosen for myself, bought with hazard pay and overtime, and years of learning to keep going under pressure. And it was still mine. It was always mine. If you have ever had to protect yourself from the people who were supposed to protect you, if you have ever had to be the one who prepared, quietly, for the worst from someone you loved, share this. Leave a comment. Tell me where you're watching from. I want to know how many of us there are.